I can go back years on myself on YouTube, so that's a terrible thought. But all of this stuff is recorded. It's transmitted right now over the internet and is recorded and eventually ends up on YouTube. So I went back and checked on Curtis, and he finished chapter 12 last week. I think it took him 2 weeks. In my opinion, Matthew 13 could probably take about 6 weeks, but I don't have that much time. So we're going to go really fast here. Matthew contains the most references of any of the New Testament books to things like the kingdom of heaven or the kingdom of God. It has 54 references to that, and Luke is second behind it at about 43, and then it drops really, really fast. In fact, Matthew could be called the kingdom gospel easily. It was for Jews primarily, and they were very, very king and kingdom oriented in their thinking. And so these parables make a great deal of sense to them. They make sense to us too, but they make even more sense to the Jews. They were looking for a special kingdom, with the Messiah coming, and they were thinking in terms of a physical kingdom. And of course, Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world." And so here in Matthew 13, we get 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's see, where are we? Let me go one. We get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We get 7 apparent kingdom parables in this one chapter. This is the highest density of kingdom parables. Oddly enough, the first one, the sower, never says the kingdom of heaven or the kingdom of God is like something, whereas most of the others do, but it's understood to be a kingdom parable. There are also others. Matthew 18, let me show you the others here right quick. Whoops, wrong way. Okay. There are others. There's a king that settles accounts. Remember the ungrateful servant and the king settling his accounts, Matthew 18. The vineyard workers. There are actually 2 different vineyard stories. One is in, let's see, vineyard. Joe, where is it? Well, there is a Matthew version of the vineyard workers and then a Mark version of vineyard workers, but they're similar type stories. There's the wedding banquet, which occurs in Matthew 22. It also, a similar one that's not so much a wedding banquet, but just a big banquet, occurs in Luke 14. The 10 virgins that trimmed their lamps properly and everything occurs in Matthew. And very few, and in Mark 4, we have this short growing seed parable that kind of follows the parable of the sower. But the vast, vast majority of these are in Matthew, 7 of them being right here in Matthew 13. So we will take a brief and quick look at these. We'll start with the parable of the sower. And you may have heard in the past that it could also be called the parable of the soils, because it's about 4 kinds of soil. The sower, although he's important, and Jesus will explain who that is, the sower is not so much the central figure of the parable, but rather the soils are the central figure of the parable. And I'd like to read through this and then read what Jesus says about the parable. And I went to Alabama Christian High School. I spent 3.5 years in Montgomery at Alabama Christian High School. We lived there. And graduated from that high school, which became Faulkner University, by the way, eventually. And I had to take Bible every day, all those years. That was a class you took, and you got high school credit for it. And one of the classes was on the parables. And I remember very clearly, and this has been a long time ago, a teacher that was teaching it said, we must be careful in assigning meaning to things in parables that do not have an assigned meaning. Sometimes a parable breaks down if you just keep going and going and going and assigning meaning to every little thing. Let me give you an example. You see the guy up there spreading the seed. What does the sack represent that he's taking the seed out of? Doesn't say. You could speculate what it might be, But to say that it is something is not adequate. I mean, it's not explained. It's not really part of the parable. And we sometimes try to extend parables to have, oh, well, okay, that means that he's wearing a rag on his head to protect his head, and that has a meaning, and his sandals mean something. And you can't do that with parables. They have a central meaning, and if you push it to the limit, you can destroy the whole value of the parable if you just keep trying to assign meaning to every little thing. That's not its intent at all. It's an overall idea is what he's doing. And if Jesus explains it in detail, okay, good, that works. I'm good with that. But sometimes he doesn't explain anything in them sometimes. And so you kind of have to go, okay, what's the central idea here? And so that will be part of what we're looking for here today is the central idea. He says the kingdom is like, or he implies the kingdom is like. Okay, in what way does this parable give us a view of the kingdom without going into all these little rabbit holes and everything and trying to find meaning in every least little detail of it on that. So let's use that as sort of our, as DOE says, our overarching view of the, I hate that word. Hate overarching and stakeholders. They're so overused. They don't mean anything anymore. Okay, it's kind of like bigot, racist, fashion. None of those words mean anything anymore. Everybody's that, So they've lost their real meanings because we use it for everything now. Okay, so parable of the sower, Matthew 13. Now, Jesus has just left, I think, a house in chapter 12, and people were saying, hey, here's your brothers and sisters. And he goes, no, here are my brothers and sisters. And so they think he's a little bit crazy. So it says that same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat by the lake. Such large crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat in it while all the people stood on the shore, which is exactly backwards from what we would do. We would all sit and the teacher would stand, but that was the style of that time. Teacher sat, people stood. People stood on the shore, so he pushes off to off the shore a little bit so they can see him, and he's sitting in the boat. Then he told them many things in parables, saying, I hate it that the NIV says a farmer, so I'm going to say a sower. A sower went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places where it didn't have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow, but when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they were withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still other seed fell on good soil, where it produced a crop, 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown. Whoever has ears, let him hear. So, thankfully, the disciples come to Jesus immediately here in verse 10, and it says, the disciples came to him and asked, why do you speak to the people in parables? He replied, because the knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom of heaven have been given to you, but not to them. Whoever has, that's hard to do. Whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. This is why I speak to them in parables. Almost sounds cruel at that point, doesn't it? Though seeing, they do not see. Though hearing, they do not hear or understand. In them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah, and this is Isaiah 6, 9, and 10. You will ever be hearing, but never understanding. You will be ever seeing, but never perceiving. For this people's heart has become calloused. They hardly hear with their ears, and they have closed their eyes. Otherwise, they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn, and I would heal them. But blessed are your eyes because they see, and your ears because they hear. For truly I tell you, many prophets and righteous people long to see what you see, but did not see it, and to hear what you hear, but did not hear it. Okay, here comes the explanation of the parable. Listen then to what the parable of the sower means. Interestingly, NIV switches back over to sower instead of farmer. Maybe it's a different word. When anyone hears the message about the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what was sown in their heart. This is the seed sown along the path. The seed falling on rocky ground refers to someone who hears the word and at once receives it with joy, but since they have no root, they last only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, they quickly fall away. The seed falling among the thorns refers to someone who hears the word, but worries of this life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke the word, making it unfruitful. But the seed falling on good soil refers to someone who hears the word and understands it. This is the one who produces a crop, yielding 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown. Here's one of those examples. What does the 100, what does the 60, what does the 30 mean? It means nothing. It's just an increase is all it means. We can't assign a specific meaning to those numbers. So, what is the parable of the sower or the soils? What's it telling us? Don't all of you speak up at once, okay? What's it telling us? It's about the kingdom, but what is it about the kingdom? Okay.
Everyone who hears doesn't receive
Okay.
the same way. Some people, it takes in the good soil and it lasts forever. Other people, you can say it and it just, as my dad used to say, it goes in one ear and out the other.
I have that a lot. You can see light through my head.
Others, it takes, but then it quickly goes away, and just like it says. I mean, there's the 4 different ways that the word can be received. And
Okay. Anything else?
No.
Okay. Okay, here's another one of those. You can't push it too far. Are there only 4 types of people? There could be more, so let's not limit that number. He's giving an example, is what he's doing here. Again, don't push the story too much beyond its limits. Okay, so it appears to be about people receiving the Word of God from someone. It could be Jesus, it could be an evangelist, it could be you, it could be me, it could be anybody. We are seed sowers, so in a sense it could be us. And it says that not everybody will receive it properly, I guess. And some will look like they did. But when things get tough, they don't last. Have you ever seen anybody like that in the church? All the time. You know, when the tough get going, sometimes they get gone. Then you'll see other people that you think, they're never going to last. And they are faithful forever. And yet they're not, I hate to use the word not a dynamic Christian, but let me explain what I mean by that. They're not visible that much, you know. They're not out there teaching and knocking on doors. I hated that when I was a kid. They're not out there doing visible things, but yet they just plod along doing good, most of which you never see or never know about. I could tell you of a number of people in this congregation that are like that. So, the parable of the sower or of the seed says, and he never says the kingdom of heaven is like that, but it's with a bunch of others, so we assume it is since it's the biggest one in the group and all the others follow it. So the kingdom has strong, committed folks in it, some of which are very fruitful and some of which are less fruitful, but all of which in that group are acceptable to God. At least that's what would appear to be the case. You may not have, or I may not have the skills and talent to produce 100-fold. I might be a secondary seed, you know, but nevertheless, it's profitable still. And I'm going to do exactly what I said don't do. I'm going to extend this thing a little bit. Do you think it makes sense for a sower to go out and say, okay, here's some good ground. I'm going to plow it, and I'm going to shape it and everything. And, there's a rock over there, big old hard rock. There's Rocky Top over there. I think I'll just go over there and throw a whole bunch of seed on that pile of rocks and see what happens. they identified a plot of land that they expected to get quality out of, didn't they? Rather than just going and throwing seed up against a hillside or a bunch of rocks or something. And what I'm trying to say here is you should be a seed scatterer, but you should be intelligent enough to know that there's lots of good land out there that will be fruitful. So kind of err in the direction of that a little bit because, you know, even Jesus didn't go running after people that tried to leave him. And well, they're just not called to the kingdom, I guess. You know, he talked to them. Remember in John when he talked about, you know, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you cannot have any part of me. And what did it say happened after he said that? Many of his disciples, not just people who were standing there listening, many of his disciples left him at that point. Now, we, in our way of looking at things, would have gone running after them. Oh, you misunderstood me. You misunderstood me. Come on back. This was symbolic. I wasn't really meaning that you had to be a cannibal, which the Christians were accused of, by the way, for about 150 years. Some people are just not called. Or obviously, 3 of the 4 soils failed. And do you think the sower was trying to throw seed onto the unproductive soils? That was kind of accidental, wasn't it? He was trying to put it on the cultivated, the plowed, the prepared soil, the good soil. So, in our efforts to spread the Word of God, we shouldn't avoid people that are unlikely to respond to it. But we should be trying to get in that good ground, and there will be others on the edge that will hear it and respond to it in various ways, some of which will just reject it outright. So anyway, like I say, I extended the parable, and I'm probably wrong here because I shouldn't extend the meanings of parables and everything. But that just occurred to me. Okay, do you have anything you would like to say further about the parable? We're running late already. The parable of the soils or of the sower. Anything? Anybody? Yes?
Even though we all are supposed to sow the seed, we've got to be mindful, no matter how hard we work to cultivate that soil, God will cause the increase, not us.
God causes the increase, that's right. By the way, what does the water symbolize? Nothing. It's not mentioned. Okay, God gives the increase. We are sowers, and God gives the increase. So the next one starts in verse 24. It says, Jesus told them another parable. Now this time he says, the kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed, it's another sowing story, like a man who sowed good seed in his field, but while everyone was sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. That's a mean person. When the wheat sprouted and formed heads, then the weeds also appeared. The owner's servants came to him and said, Sir, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Where then did the weeds come from? An enemy did this, he replied. The servants asked him, Do you want us to go and pull them up? The weeds, I guess. No, he answered, because while you're pulling the weeds, you may uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. At that time, I will tell the harvesters, first collect the weeds, and then tie them in bundles to be burned, then gather the wheat and bring it into my barn. Now, he doesn't explain this until some distance later over here, and I'm going to jump to verse 36 where he explains it, and then we'll come back. Verse 36, Then he left the crowd and went into the house. His disciples came to him and said, Explain to us the parable of the weeds in the field. He answered, The one who sowed the good seed is the Son of Man. Okay, that's Jesus. So perhaps the sower in the other field could be Jesus, but he doesn't really say, does he? No, I don't think so. The field is the world, and the good seed stands for the people of the kingdom. The weeds are the people of the evil one. Notice they are in the kingdom field, though. And the enemy who sows them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the harvesters are angels. As the weeds are pulled up and burned in the fire, so it will be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will weed out of his kingdom everything that causes sin and all who do evil. They will throw them into the blazing furnace. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous shall shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Whoever has ears, let them hear. So, it again sounds like there are some people who are false wheat, I guess, in the kingdom. And we may never find out who they are until the end. Although I doubt that wheat knows a weed. But this one's a hard one. Why would he say things like this? That, here's the kingdom, and there might be weeds here among us. Now, if you are absolutely certain, and that's kind of hard to be, you might know a weed. But isn't it true that most of the time we don't recognize the weeds? I mean, recently we've had a lot of stuff going on TV that I would have never thought that, I would have never thought he or she or they or whatever would have done something like that. I never would have thought that. Sometimes preachers of the gospel run off with somebody. Why would they do that? Sometimes people in religious authority abuse children and women. Why would they do that? I suspect they're weeds. It might not be a weed, but it sure looks like one, doesn't it? And the Lord has the power to change weeds into wheat. He does, if the weeds are willing. I mean, he can do anything. But this one says that, again, there are some plants in the kingdom that are not really kingdom plants. They're in the kingdom, but they're not kingdom plants, and they will not go to the right harvest in the end. All right, so now, do you have anything you'd like to say about that? We're going to come back now to verse 31, and this is two parables just in immediate sequence. The parables of the mustard seed and yeast. He told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and planted in the ground. Everybody know what a mustard seed looks like? You can get whole mustard seed. Most of us know what mustard is. It's that yellow stuff that you put on a hamburger or whatever. And it's basically vinegar and a bunch of ground up mustard seeds, very, very, very tiny, and some yellow food coloring, because mustard seeds are not really yellow. The Grey Poupon mustard is more the color of mustard seed. It's kind of a grayish tan or something. Anyway, mustard seeds are very tiny little. It's like a 32nd of an inch. It's really small. He says he planted it in his field. Though it is the smallest of all seeds, yet when it grows, it's the largest of garden plants and becomes a tree, essentially, so that the birds come and perch in its branches. And then he does not explain it. He says he still told him another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed into about 60 pounds, I don't know why he chooses 60 pounds, that's a lot, of flour until it worked all through the dough. Jesus spoke all these things to the crowd in parables. He did not say anything to them without using a parable, so was fulfilled what was spoken through the prophet. This is actually a Psalm 78, verse 2. I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter things hidden since the creation of the world. Okay, so what's this story about mustard seed and this woman putting some yeast in a whole bunch of dough? What does that tell us about the kingdom? A little bit can go a long way. And in theory, a little bit of good can go a long way, and a little bit of bad can go a long way too, I'm afraid, in things. But it's almost like he's saying, Ephesians 2:10 says, go and do some good things, basically. Do good stuff. Doesn't tell you what you've heard me say it before. God has a plan for you. That's Ephesians 2:10. Go and do good stuff, whatever it is. Just go do good. You're not, he rarely ever picks somebody, I think, to be a great leader. In fact, you have to be pretty flawed for him to do that, because all of his great leaders were pretty flawed. So apparently you need to be in bad shape before he can use you in that regard. But just go and do good stuff And you'll be surprised at how much it turns into, is kind of what he's saying. This woman puts this little, a few grams of yeast in 60 pounds of dough. That's a lot of dough. She was going to feed a lot of biscuits to people here. And it leavens the entire lump. Another place he says that. A little leaven, leavens the entire lump. So planting little seeds, mustard seeds, that kind of goes back to the parable of the sower a little bit. If you plant a small seed, it might turn into something remarkable. So you should do a lot of that, If you put just a little bit of leaven in a whole lot of dough, it will make the whole 60 pounds rise. If you got good leaven. Leaven gets bad after a while. Dried yeast packages, if you let them sit for 5-10 years, they don't work very well. There's something wrong with it. It dies out. So I'm thinking he's just saying, you really don't have any idea how much of influence and effect you can have. One of my favorite examples was a casual remark that I made to one of my cousins when he was about 9, and I was maybe 3 years older than him, and I don't even remember saying it. He was having trouble getting motivated to go do his homework. And he tells me that I told him, just go do it. That's the only way you're going to get it done. Just go do it and quit worrying about it so much and putting it off, because you'll never get it done if that's all you do. Just go do it. I don't remember saying that to him. Years later, as an adult, he comes to me and he says, you remember when you told me that? And I went, I was like 11? I don't know. And he says, that stuck with me. That stuck with me, and from then on, I always got my work done rather than just putting it off and putting it off. I'm good. I'm glad I didn't say something bad to him, because that could have gone another way. Well, you don't need to do your homework. Nobody cares anyway. So even things you don't remember saying and it seemed trivial in some cases can have a major effect. My son and I, he's a lot like me, so you can imagine how great we get along, or did get along. Both hard-headed and opinionated and condescending and all those other wonderful characteristics. We fought like dogs about it. I could say the sky's blue, and he said, no, Dad, the sky's actually black. The sunlight from the sun reflects at an angle, and the blue is more reflect. Son, I'm a physicist. I know what you mean, but it's blue, okay? And we would argue about things like that. And you may remember, in fact, it's one of the first ones you hit on YouTube if you look up my last name and type HVCOC or something. And the story was about, almost always better to be kind than to be right. And one day I said that to him in the car. Our whole relationship is completely different now. I just casually said, son, it's just better to be kind than right sometimes. And our relationship is great now. We almost never argue about the color of the sky. His wife reminds him regularly that I said that, and Tyra reminds me regularly that I said that too. So anyway, little things can make a really big difference in life. So we should try very, very hard to do good things wherever possible. Good things wherever possible, and let big good things come from them. So now let's see, I need to jump over verse 36 and following, because we've already read that. That's about the parable of the weeds. And now we are looking at verse 44, the parables of the hidden treasure and pearl. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy went and sold all he had and bought that field. I can think of all kinds of reasons to shoot that one down in our present day of looking at things, but we won't do that. It's immaterial. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant looking for fine pearls. When he found one of great value, he went away and sold everything he had and bought it. What in the world is he talking about? The kingdom is like a hidden treasure in a field that somebody's, Sold all he had and went and bought the field with the expectation of what? Getting the treasure, right? We would say, well, he should have told the owner before he, misrepresented the truth and bought it. No, he just went to the owner and said, I'd like to buy your field. You don't have to tell everything you know. Jesus didn't even do that. The merchant, look, he was a pearl merchant, and he found this pearl of great price, and he sold everything to get that. What does that tell us about the kingdom? It's very, very precious, and it is worth everything you have to get it, even if it means you die. I remember, what was it, maybe last year, ISIS was executing, various Christian groups. And they would take them out and put them in a cage in the water and let the tide just slowly rise and drown them, or they would chop their heads off or something. And it was reported that many of them died with the name of Jesus on their lips. They wouldn't recant. It's precious, beyond imagination. It's worth everything you've got. That one's pretty clear, isn't it? I think those two are pretty clear. The kingdom and being part of it is very, very precious, above everything, and worth everything in our lives. I've said not recently, but I've said on occasions, and don't misunderstand me, I don't care if my children starve to death. I do, but let's just say that. I don't care if my children starve to death as long as they make it home to the Father. I would rather they not starve to death, but if they do and they make it, I'm good. I'm good. I don't care if I starve to death as long as I make it. It's that precious. The parable of the net. We're almost done here. Once again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was let down in the lake and caught all kinds of fish. When it was full, fishermen pulled it up on the shore. Then they sat down and collected the good fish in baskets and threw the bad away. This is how it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come and separate the wicked from the righteous and throw them into the blazing furnace, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Have you understood all these things? Jesus asked. And of course, they're afraid to say anything other than yes, I guess. They replied. He said to them, therefore, every teacher of the law who has become a disciple in the kingdom of heaven is like the owner of a house who brings out of his storeroom new treasures as well as old. That one is just kind of an addition to the end of it. So is the net really very, very similar to the parable about the man who planted wheat and had weeds in his field? There's that separation in there. He throws these at us fairly quickly. You can imagine how difficult it might have been for some of these people to understand this stuff. We have 2,000 years of history and tradition and commentaries this thick, that help explain some of these things, or at least make guesses as to what they mean. Some of these people are going, what is he talking about? And again, you have to be receptive to the Spirit. And some people are not. And I don't understand why, and it's not my job to understand why. It's just my job to sow seed and try to bring as many in as I can, I guess. However, I sow seed. And most of us are not preachers or teachers. Most of us can't even stand up in front of a small group and teach a little lesson or something. Your life, what you do with your life, is your best sermon of all. If you have the skill to do the other things, by all means, do them. But your life is the best sermon of all. People need to look at you and go, what is wrong with him or her? Why? What is wrong with them? They are always kind and good. Not 100%, we all mess up. But, they're kind and they're good and they're upbeat and they care and they're generous. And what is going on with those people? Okay, the end of the chapter is unrelated to, what time do we end? About now? I haven't heard any of the bells. Okay. We're over. Merry Christmas to everybody, okay? Talk among yourselves. We're done.